Assalamualaikum, salam sejahtera. Cik
Hello.
Azmi Sharom.
Apa khabar?
Khabar baik. Selamat datang ke The Fairly Current Show.
Thank you.
Now, some people have been wondering, you've never had Azmi on the show before.
Yes, I've been wondering the same thing.
Yeah, so now you are on the show.
Yes.
We're here to talk about freedoms of academic freedoms as well as freedom of information. You recently wrote about the Freedom of Information bill that's trying to be passed in Selangor.
Yes.
Why do you think this piece of legislation is important?
Well, freedom of information is related to freedom of expression, because you can't really express yourself fully if you are not able to obtain information. So it's linked to expression. That's the first point I want to make. Secondly, there are lots of activities which government do in this country which have been secret, even though they shouldn't be secret and there's no reason for them to be secret, which makes monitoring their behavior difficult. So with the bill, and if it becomes an actual law, then the citizens of Selangor will have the opportunity to get the information they need in an organized fashion. And this is very useful for democracy as a whole.
How do you think the lawmakers in other states or even federal lawmakers would respond to something like this?
I think Penang are toying with the idea, but of course we're just talking about Pakatan states. The federal government, of course, will not want this.
Why?
They've had 50 over years of secrecy. They like it that way. It makes life easier for them. I can't see them, voluntarily giving up information which can be used against them.
Right. That's why we have Malaysia Today.
Yes.
Our own little version of WikiLeaks.
Yeah.
Editorialized, of course.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what do you think are the challenges in trying to persuade other states that may not be Pakatan government states to embrace, to take on this kind of spirit?
I don't think we can rely on the state governments themselves to be willing to do this. It is up to the electorate to make this part of their demands. Ultimately, I mean, if the state government is serious about fighting corruption, for example, then they should embrace it. You can't say, oh, we want to fight corruption, but you don't have a freedom of information law. Because the freedom of information law helps to combat corruption because it makes things more transparent. And by being more transparent, you become more accountable. And by being more accountable, it's harder for you to have corrupt practices. So any state which says we don't like corruption but doesn't have a freedom of information bill or doesn't propose to have a freedom of information bill are simply being hypocritical.
What do you think about MACC's request for cabinet members to disclose their wealth?
Yeah, fine, but also disclose their wives' wealth and their children's wealth and their uncle and auntie and grandma and their gardener, if they're related. You got to expose it all, because these buggers are clever. They're not going to keep all the wealth under their name, man. I mean, you think what? They're not stupid. Well,
Let's talk about the universities. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And the kind of recently we know, for example, we have the UKM4, the case of the UKM4, and students trying to participate more in whether local, their own university politics. But beyond that, I think the question of academic freedom is also something that looms large in our imagination at this point in time. What are the kind of problems faced by academics, the professors, lecturers, and how is it that this scenario is right now?
Part of the problem is legal, because with regards to academic staff, the primary law which can be used against us is the Statutory Bodies Discipline and Surcharge Act, which has a discipline section in it where you can't criticize government policies without getting permission first. And you can't,
permission from whom?
You presume is the minister. Okay, you can't criticize, neither can you praise. And in an academic setting, that makes things very difficult, especially for the social sciences. Of course, you've got to push the boundaries. All right. So that comes to the second problem. The second problem is that academics have behaved in a way which is pretty gutless, lah. We've just got to You just got to do what you want to do, you know, and then the consequences come, deal with it, you know. But we've got to push the envelope, you know. Instead, we just cower away, you know. We act, you know, emasculated like, I don't know, Jude Law, you know. And we have to be a bit more mature, lah. You know. We've got to be a bit more Stallone about the whole thing, and then just do it. Do what you want to do. Say what you want to say. Write what you want to write. Make sure that what you do is academically sound. Okay, because academic freedom, the limits to academic freedom is academic authenticity. And as long as you have that, then be brave. Stand up for what you believe in. But we haven't, you see. Academics, like all other Malaysians, we have been conditioned into this culture of fear. And that is the second problem, which I think is a bigger problem.
How do we cut through this problem? How do we resolve it? How do we attack or start to attend to it? Because we've always been talking about students, you know, university students, but really.
Well, I think a good place to start would be leadership. You know, if your vice chancellor actually have the balls to say that, look, I will defend my people, you know, as long as what they're doing is academically sound, I will defend them. You know, we could start with that. All right. Of course, ultimately the laws have to be changed. Statutory Bodies Discipline Surcharge Act has to be done away with, or at least universities have to be taken out of that act. All right, exempted from that act. But until that time, you could just have strong leadership. You know, you could have vice chancellors, you know, who are gutsy enough to say, my people should be free. Let my people be free.
Do you think such personalities?
Of course not. What are you talking about? Give me a break. Give me a break. I mean, like, you have one VC who's actually ex-BTN. Come on. You know, go marching and singing, you know.
So it's looking quite grim.
I think it is, but you know, it's really, I mean, why, at the end of the day, I mean, like, I think we just have to take it upon ourselves to just do it. Do what we want to do, write what we want to write, say what we want to write. Say what we want to say. You know, I mean, it would be useful if these things happen. You know, you had a very supportive VC, or you had a change in the law, but really, we got to force their hand. You know, and how do you do that? I don't know, jumpy, I don't know. I mean, like, how do you change people's brains?
Okay, well, thank you so much for coming on the show.
My pleasure.
But one last question. How do you think Spurs will do in this coming...
Supporting Spurs is like supporting the opposition in Malaysia. You're always hopeful, but you know, more often than not you tend to be disappointed. So I won't say anything to jinx my team, except to say that they are obviously the best football team in the world.
Awesome, thank you so much, Azmi Sharom, and welcome again to the audience of
About Time.
Yeah, thank you, and see you soon.
Okay.